Today's daf is daf Zion, and we'll begin with Omar Shmuel, Omar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, which is approximately 7 lines down from the top. So we had some statements in the tradition of Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda. Here's another one with regard to Purim. Omar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Sholchu hem Esther lechachamim. Esther wants Purim to be established by the Chachamim. So she sends a message. This was 1 year after the great miracles of the defeat of the Amalekim, of Agag, and so forth, and Haman. Kivuni lidoros, establish Purim for all generations. And this is not a simple matter. First of all, she needs a bezdin that has the authority to be kovea a holiday ludoros. And that's not something that can be established by the malchus of Achashverosh and Esther. Secondly, there's a problem of Baltosif, because the Torah gave us 613 mitzvahs, and now you want to establish another mitzvah. That's not so simple either. And thirdly, she had an interest in making it into a yontif with an Isur Malacha. So if it's only a mitzvah of Kriyas HaMegillah, that would be one thing. But she wants it a full-fledged yontif with Isur Malacha. And that's very problematic. We don't add a yontif just like this. Sholchullah, the Chachamim answered, you know what? We could theoretically put our Koach Bezdin behind, and for whatever reason, which we have to understand, it's not Baltotzif. However, Kina Atma Oreres Olenu Lebena Umos. This is going to create a negative response through the generations if we establish Purim, because our adversaries are going to say, look, they're happy because we were defeated. Sholchu lahem, Esther replies, if that's what you're worried about, no problem. No problemo, as we say in Spanish. They've already recorded me in their history books, and you can't tell me that by adding Purim, that's going to fan the flames of jealousy and hatred. It's already written up in history. And this was our defeat of our enemies, and the peoples and the nations of the world are going to have to live with that. They're going to have to tolerate that. Now, let's just read, before we go on in the Gemara, the Psukim in the Megillah, in Esther Perek Tes, Vayichtov Mordechai Sadvarim ha'eleh, Vayishalach Sfarim el kol ha'Yehudim, L'kayim aleim lios osim. And the pasuk seems to indicate that Mordechai was trying to invoke the support of the people to set up these days of Purim as days of Yontif with an Isur Malacha. But the Jews never accepted that. And then finally, there was a second Igeris, a second letter that was sent out by Esther. And it says, Vatichtov Esther Amalka, Vaishalach Sfarim al Kol HaYehudim. And in that pasuk, it says, Divrei Shalom v'emes, meaning don't worry about Kinah, and don't worry about our adversaries rising against us. Halohem ksuvim al sefer divrei hayom el malchei madai uparas. It's already been inscribed in the annals of history amongst the texts of Paras Umadai. Now we have another approach to the discussion, the dialogue back and forth between Esther and the Chacham. Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chaviva, Masnu, Bekule Seder Moed. Now, the question here is whether or not Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan belongs here in this line of tradition. And Kolki Hai Zuga, whenever you have this line of tradition, the Gemara says, Chilufe Rabbi Yochanan Umayile Rabbi Yonasan. There's a mistake in the transmission, faulty transmission, and instead of Rabbi Yochanan, it should say Rabbi Yonasan. whenever you have this line of tradition. Sholchu lahem estel chachamim kisvuni l'doros. The issue here is about the Megillah itself. Would the Megillah be upgraded to the status of Kisvei HaKodesh? Would be one of the 24 Kisvei HaKodesh? Sholchu la, and they sent back a message based on a pasuk in Mishlei, Halo kasavti l'cha shlishim. This has to do with Milchemes Amalek, the Jewish battle against Amalek is meant to be written 3 times. Shlishim v'lo rebeim, not 4. And we already have 3 times mentioned Megillah. Amalek. We have 2 in the Torah, which is at the end of Parshas B'Shalach. It says there, Vayava Amalek Vayilachem Yisrael, etc. Moshe and Yoshua battle against Amalek. Then we have at the end of Parshas Kitetse, Zachar Esa Sharaselcha Amalek. So that's twice in the Torah itself. And we have 1 in the Navi. And that's in Sefer Shmuel, when Shmuel calls upon Shaul, based on Nevuah, to go out and battle against Amalek. So at this point, the Gemara establishes, in response to Esther's request, that we cannot add another mention of Milchemes Amalek beyond the 3 that we already have. And therefore, Megillas Esther, which codifies the Milchama against Amalek, cannot be included in the Tanakh. Until they found a pasuk at the end of Parshas B'Shalach, and based on that pasuk, they were able to permit including Megillas Esther and Ksuvim. The pasuk says, "Ksov zos zikaron b'sefer." We'll read the whole pasuk. V'sim b'yozne Yoshua ki macho emche es zecher Amalek mitachas hashamayim. So we're going to dash in the pasuk. Ksov zos masha kosav kan. So that part of the pasuk, the beginning of the pasuk, is an allusion to this mention of Amalek, macho emche es zecher Amalek, at the end of Parshas B'Shalach. And then it says that Zos means in the Torah itself. And therefore we're allowed to use Ksov Zos and expand its scope to include not only Parshas B'Shalach, but also Parshas Kitetse, U'B'Mishneh Torah. So with one phrase of Ksov Zos, we cover all of Chumash, 2 different parashios, but it's considered one, Ksov Zos. Then it says Zikaron, and Zikaron is a reference to Nevi'im. In this case, Masha Kosav Nevi'im b'Sefer Shmuel. Then we have a 4th word in this pasuk, Bas Sefer. Masha Kosav b'Megillah, that's a remez to Megillas Esther. And it permits us to add Megillas Esther into the Holy Writ, into part of the Kisvei HaKodesh. Now we have a kasha from one of the late Achronim. He says, Yesh l'tmoa, manis chadish l'chachamim b'mikra zeh. Originally, they were of the opinion that Sefer Shmos and Kitetse in Dvarim are 2 different Hazkaros. And therefore we left with that plus Navi, Shmuel, and we have only 3. We maxed out. So if you're telling me now that one of those 2 Hazkaros encompasses the entire Torah, both B'Shalach and Kitetse, then what was the question from Shilation V'lo Ribeim? Ella, what they thought that Shmos and Kitesi are two different Askaros. So what do you gain by quoting the pasuk Sov Zosi Karba Sefer? So the Pnei Yoshua offers the following approach. Again, initially, the Gemara was of the opinion that those Haskaros where Milchemes Amalek is mentioned in the Torah are counted as two. And therefore we have no source and no basis for adding Megillas Esther. But when they saw the pasuk Sov Zosi Karba Sefer, they understood that the word Zos is a remez to the entire Torah. That's the nature of Zos, because Zos refers to the Torah itself, any part of the Torah. So the word Zikaron refers to Nevi'im, and the word Sefer now refers to Ksuvim. And Megillas Esther is going to be incorporated not in Nevi'im, but rather in Ksuvim. And he quotes Yerushalmi to prove this. The Gemara says, Kitanoi. Now we have a machlokes Tanoim. Sov Zos. We're up to Rav Yeshua. Mashakosov Khan. According to Rav Yeshua, Zikar Mashakosov Mishnah Torah, two separate mentionings. Sefer Mashakosov Nevi'im. Rabbi Lazar Modai Omer. Sov Zos Mashakosov Khan. Ube Mishnah Torah. So we get both Azkaras in the Sefer, in the 5 books of Moses included on the Sov Zos. And Zikaron Mashakosov Nevi'im, and then Basefer Mashakosov Megillah. Omer Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel Esther Eino Mitama Es HaYadayim. So this takes us back to Masechet Shabbos on Daf Yud Daled, which is called the Yud Ches Gzeros of Tumah. Now, what was the background to these 18 Gzeros of Tumah? One of which is that a Sefer is Mitama Yadayim. What happened is that it became standard practice for people to wrap up Truma inside a parchment of Kisvei HaKodesh. Why? Because they said Zeh Kodesh v'Zeh Kodesh. And as a result of the fact that the Truma, which is edible, was being covered by the parchment of Kisvei HaKodesh, the mice started eating away at the Kisvei HaKodesh because they were tempted by the cheese, by the Truma. So they made a Gzera of Tumah on Kisvei HaKodesh, that any time that your hands come in contact with Kisvei HaKodesh, they become Psulos L'Truma, Shnios L'Truma. So that was the Gzera of Tumah on the Yadayim. And that applies to Kisvei HaKodesh. Comes along Shmuel, and he says that that Megillas Esther is not to be incorporated and is not enumerated amongst the counting of the Ksuvim. And it's not therefore included in the Gzera on Kisvei HaKodesh, that they're Matame Yadayim, when you have contact with Kisvei HaKodesh, and then your hands would passel Truma. So the Gemara asks, L'meimra, shall we therefore conclude the Sovereign Shmuel Esther La Baruch HaKodesh Nemra? That Esther, Megillas Esther, cannot be included in Kisvei HaKodesh because it wasn't a matter of the Holy Spirit of the Ruach HaKodesh. It was just a literary work. Via Amar Shmuel himself is committed to the position that Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. So Gemara answers, you know what? Esther is Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. Nemra Likros, v'lo Nemra Lichtov. There are 2 types of Ruach HaKodesh. There's Ruach HaKodesh, which is meant to be written, and therefore upgraded to the status of Kisvei HaKodesh. There's another status of Kisvei HaKodesh, which is not given to writing. Lo Nemra Lichtov. It's a Ruach HaKodesh, but it wasn't with the specific mandate to be written down. So it means that according to Shmuel, you could read Megillas Esther Bal Peh. Why? because there's going to be a Mishnah later on that discusses the case about Baal Peh. Let's say, for example, on Purim, you read the Megillah Baal Peh by heart without a ksav. According to Shmuel, if it's likros v'lo nemer lichtov, so the writing of Megillas Esther on a klaf has no significance whatsoever, and therefore reading it from a klaf likewise has no significance. But in fact, the Mishnah paskins that Megillah Shekara Baal Peh lo yatsa. How is Shmuel going to understand that Mishnah? And this is the subject of this long Tosas here on the top of Dav Zayin Amud Aleph. And Tosas says that even Shmuel agrees that Mirabbanan, Midirei Chachamim, Megillah is nitnali kaseh. He says that you can write Megillah Esther on a ksav, and that's Midirei Chachamim. He says, but nevertheless, it doesn't have the status for Tumas Yadayim of Kisvei HaKodesh. It means that according to Tosfos, there are two different dinim. One din is whether or not you're allowed to write it, and once you write it, you can read it from the ksav. It has a din of kriya. It's a ksiva litzarach kriya, and that you can check off with regard to Megillah Esther. And then you have another category called Kisvei HaKodesh. And that's Metame Yadayim. Shmuel holds, although it's Nitan L'Kriya, but it's not a full-fledged Kisvei HaKodesh, not incorporated to the Holy Writ, and therefore it's not included under the Gzeira of Tumas Yadayim. So Gemara is not happy with this. Meisvei, we have a Brisa Rabbi Meir Omer Koheles Eina Metame Yadayim. Rabbi Meir's opinion is that Koheles is not incorporated in the Holy Writ, and therefore it's not Kisvei HaKodesh, it's not Metamis Yadayim. Umachlokes, however, the Brisa records a debate between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, Shir HaShirim. What's the status of Shir HaShirim? Is it part of Kisvei HaKodesh or not? Rabbi Yossi Omer Shir HaShirim Metamis Yadayim. According to Rabbi Yossi, there never was a debate about Shir HaShirim. Everybody, even Beit Shammai, agree that Shir HaShirim has the upgraded status of Kisvei HaKodesh, and therefore it's Metame Yadayim. The machlok between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, says Rabbi Yossi, is about Koheles. And there was never a debate about Shir HaShirim. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Koheles mikule Beit Shammai u'michumei Beis Hillel. Here we have one of those rare exceptions to the rule that Beis Hillel are only to Mekilim, Beit Shammai always to Machmirim. In this context, Beit Shammai dafka are the Mekilim more than Beis Hillel, because according to Beit Shammai, Koheles is not Metame Yadayim. So therefore, Koheles is called Kulei Beit Shammai. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, says that Koheles is Metame Yadayim. But, says Reb Shimon, although Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai are fighting it out with regard to the status of Koheles, our Rus v'Shir HaShirim, the Esther, Metame Yadayim. These three books are certainly, undeniably, incorporated into Tanakh. They have the status of Kisvei HaKodesh. And therefore they are Metame Yadayim, like any Kisvei HaKodesh. And Esther here is contradictory to Shmuel. Shmuel says that Megillah Esther is not Metame Yadayim. More answers, who? The Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua holds that Megillah Esther lo nitnali kasev, and therefore it's not incorporated into Kisvei HaKodesh. It's not Metame Yadayim. And Shmuel accepted the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. The other Tanoim hold that Esther is part of Kisvei HaKodesh. It's Metame Yadayim, and they agree to Rabbi Lazar that Megillah Esther is nitnali kasev. That's the Shita Rabbi Lazar. And that's how we paskin la'aloch. And again, all this has to do with the original drush of Ksov Zos Zikar Baseifer. If we accept Rabbi Elazar that Ksov Zos incorporates both Parshas B'Shalach and Parshas Kiteitzei, then we have Zikaron, we have Baseifer. Zikaron is number 3, and Baseifer, right, number 3, which is the Parshat Shmuel, when Shaul is sent to the battle of Amalek. And now we have Baseifer, which is the allusion to Megilla Esther. Anya, we learned in the Brisa of Chimba and Asi Omer Koheles, Eidim Mitamisi Yadayin. Koheles is not part of Kisvei HaKodesh. It's not Ruach HaKodesh, but rather the wisdom of Shlomo. So this is the book of wisdom, according to Reb Shimon, that's Koheles. You know, you're talking about the Chachma of Shlomo HaMelech. Are you telling me that Koheles is the exclusive Divrei Chachma? There's no Divrei Chachma from Shlomo HaMelech other than Koheles? Valokvar Nemar, there are possibly Malach Mal Perkei, by the Ber Shloshes Alofim Moshel, that Shlomo HaMelech had 3,000 metaphors. That's because Shlomo HaMelech asked for Chachma, for wisdom. And you cannot tell me that Koheles exhausts all of the Chachma of Shlomo HaMelech. That's impossible. So we're going to have to assume that Chachma divides into two subcategories. There's one Chachma which is Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, and there's one Chachma which is just wisdom, the insights of a brilliant mind of Shlomo HaMelech. So when the Tanakh tells us that Shlomo HaMelech was capable of 3,000 Mishalim, that's Divrei Chachma. That's not written down as part of Ruach HaKodesh and Tanakh. However, when you're talking about Koheles, that's a special book. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that was written down B'Kisvei HaKodesh. And the pasuk says in Mishlei, Al Toscha, Al Tosav Al Dvarecha. This is a further proof that Koheles is Ruach HaKodesh and it's part of Kisvei HaKodesh. My V'yomer. So the Gemara tries to clarify this statement of Al Tosef Al Dvarecha. What did this Bryce of Reb Shimon and Asi want to derive from that pasuk? What was the kavana to prove from that pasuk? What did he try to prove from the pasuk? And the answer is the Chacham said to Reb Shimon and Asi, "V'chi tema." And if you'll say that you don't like my first proof from the Shloshes Alofim Mashal, Meimar Tuva Omar. Maybe Shlomo HaMelech had much chachma that goes beyond the 3,000 Mashalim. It even includes the book of Koheles. The Ibai Ichtiv, the Ibai Lo Ichtiv. The choice was in the lap of Shlomo HaMelech. He would decide whether to write it down, committed to writing or not. And that which he wanted to write, he wrote. And that which he didn't, he didn't. And therefore, you're going to argue that perhaps Koheles is also another form of Mishalim. It was not Mipiv Shal HaKodesh Baruch Hu, it's no Ruach HaKodesh. Toshma, I'll bring you another proof from a pasuk in Mishlei. Al Tosf Al Dvarav. In other words, God prohibited Shlomo from adding to that which is written. It means everything else besides these 3,000 Mishalim was written down and incorporated into Tanakh, into Ksuvim. So the Brisa is deriving from the words of Shlomo HaMelech, Al Tosfa Al Dvarav, that you're not allowed to add other Sfarim B'Ksav. And that means above and beyond Koheles, but Koheles was part of the Ksav. Tanya, we learned in the Brayso of Belazar Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemar. Shenemar. Now the Gemara is going to prove that Megillas Esther was said Baruch HaKodesh. Vayomer Haman Belibo. How do we know what Haman said to his heart? We can only know it if it was revealed by Ruach HaKodesh. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemar Shenemar, Vatahi Esther no says Chen Yeni Kol Roel. How could the Megillah possibly know that she was Motzei Chen in the eyes of every single person, if not for Ruach HaKodesh? Rabbi Meir Omer, Esther Baruch HaKodesh Nemar, Vayivoda Dover LeMordechai. Mordechai found out, discovered the plans of Bigtzon V'Seresh to destroy the life of King Achashverosh. Who revealed that to him? It must have been Beruach HaKodesh. So here we have a famous kash of the Turi Even, the Shagasari. He says, what's the proof that Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra? Okay, Mordechai had Beruach HaKodesh, and that's how we found out about Bigtzon V'Seresh. But that doesn't mean the entire book of Megillas Esther is written Beruach HaKodesh. And he says, V'im Tomer, if you'll argue that Me'acher V'hoya Mordechai Baal Ruach HaKodesh, and therefore we can assume that Esther had Ruach HaKodesh, and therefore we should conclude that for sure the Megillah was written Baruch HaKodesh. He's not impressed by this in Turi Even. He says Shlomo HaMelech for sure was a Baal Ruach HaKodesh. And nevertheless, we have all this debate and contention about which books of Shlomo HaMelech are part of Ruach HaKodesh and part of Kisvei HaKodesh. The fact that Shlomo HaMelech had in certain books Kisvei HaKodesh, like Shir Shir, for example, Ruach HaKodesh, doesn't mean that everything that came out of the mouth of Shlomo HaMelech, ipso facto, is Ruach HaKodesh. So this is a very difficult piece here in the name of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis Omer, Esther Ruach HaKodesh Nemar Ubabiza lo sholchu es yadam, that none of the Jews after the defeat of Amalek took from the booty. And how would we know this? How would anybody know this? Maybe there's a Jew somewhere like Achan back in Ai who stole money and took from the Biza. It had to be written Ruach HaKodesh. So Shmuel is not happy. Amar Shmuel, if I would have been there during the time of the Tanoim and they had this debate trying to prove that Esther is Baruch HaKodesh, Hava Mina Milsa di Adifa Mikulu. I would have quoted a pasuk that for sure trumped all the other psukim. Shenemar kimu v'kibla Yehudim alev al zarav atol and nilu alev below yavar eos osu v'shnei ayom ha'elu kiksav v'kizman b'chol shana v'shana. Kimu v'kiblu. What is kimu v'kiblu? Kimu l'mala, mashe kiblu l'mata. In other words, Bezdin, up in the heavens, accepted and approved the takana of Kriyas HaMegillah in the Bezdin Shalmata. How did the authors of the Megillah, how would they know what was the approval and the final ruling and decision up in the Bezdin Shalmala? That had to be Baruch HaKodesh. Amarava lekulo islay pircha, the bar midishmul de leslay pircha. We can reject all the other psukim contending against them that they're not proof, except for that of Shmuel. Shmuel is the best proof for them all. Now the Gemara wants to know, how would you be pareah? What's the pircha for all the various views of the Tanoim? Dear Rabbi Eliezer, who proves it from Vayomer Haman Belibo, Svaro, the authors of Megillas Esther thought logically that that's exactly what Haman was thinking in his heart. It's like when you write a novel, let's say a historical novel, you guess exactly what each person in the novel is thinking. There was no one in the kingdom of Achashverosh who was more chashuv than Haman. And therefore, it's logical to assume that this is what Haman was saying in his heart, that Lemi Yachlot Samelech Lasos Yikar Yosef Mimeni. And therefore, when Haman gives this whole long presentation, when Achashverosh asks, what do we do? He says, Yaviu levush malchus shalovash ba'melech v'susa sherachav l'melech v'shanit kesa. Why was he going into all these great details about the glory, the kavod, the glory that we're going to give this person? It must be Adaiti Nafshi coming. He was hoping, and he had no doubt in his mind that this was meant for him. Hod Rabbi Meir, Dilma Rabbi Chia, Ar Abba, the other big son of Sarah, Shnei Tarsiim Hayu. Now, what is Tarsiim? Tarshis means they spoke a certain language. And they thought that no one around them would understand their language. But Mordechai was a member of the Sanhedrin, and therefore he knew 70 languages. And that's how he found out about their plan. He simply overheard them speaking, and he understood the language that no one else understood. Hod Rabbi Yossi ben Durmaskis, that we derive from Biza lo Sholchus Yada, you can reject that as well. Dilma Pristike Shadur. Pristike means agents or shluchim. It's possible that the Jews all over the world sent shluchim to Mordechai and Esther to tell them that in our Gegin, in our location, our province, not one Jew was sholeach yad b'biza. And therefore, you can, I guarantee you, they said each one of these shluchim, that you, Mordechai and Esther, could tell the king that he shouldn't get upset about the mammon. We didn't take any of the mammon. But the Shmuel Vare Leslie Pirch, Shmuel is invincible. Amar Ravina says, Hainu Diami Inchi, this is the mashal that people give, Tava Chada Pilpalta, Charifta, one Pilpul Charif, one sharp pepper, is better than Mimole Tzane Kari. Again, one little seed of what we call today in modern Hebrew Pilpul Charif. The Yemenites love that stuff. Is better than a sal full of diluim. You know, you can fill up a basket with all sorts of pumpkins and the like, you know, squash and so forth and so on. You know, it's pilpul, even though it's very small, but yet it has more of a power as a tavlin, as a spice. It's more charif than anything you gather together that doesn't have that spice. So Shmuel, he's only an Amorah. And relative to the Tanoim, he's considered katan. And he's like a small piece of pilpul. And yet, he has the upper hand. And we accept his derivation. Rav Yosef Amar Mehacha. Rav Yossi says we could derive from a different pasuk that has to Baruch HaKodesh Nemra. It says, "V'yemei Purim ha'elu lo yavru mitoch haYehudim." How would the authors of the Megillah possibly know what's going to happen in the future during the generations down the line that they'll always accept Purim? Rav Nachbar Yitzchak Mehacha is Zichram lo Yosef Mizara. That the memory of the great miracle of Purim will never be lost amongst Zara, amongst all the generations, all the future. The Mishnah says, "My Tanas of Yonim, Tani." We have a Brisa Rabbi Yosef. It says in Megillah Esther, "Mishloach manos ish l'reyehu." Now it says manos in the plural, but it says ish l'reyehu in the singular. Shtei manos lish echad. You have to send two gifts, two portions to one person. Choose your person, send him shtei manos, and finito. Matanos levyonim, but here it's written in the plural. Shtei matanos l'shnei b'reyod. Yehuda Nesiya Shadar le Oshaya. He sent him a portion of Mishloach Manos that was Atma de Igla Tilsa. It was the thigh of an outstanding egel, of a calf, the thigh of a calf. It was Muvchar. Now, what does it mean, Igla Tilsa? Tilsa means third, number 3, plus. There's a special status to the third calf that's born to its mother. The first 2 calves that are born when the mother is really new at giving birth and developing the embryo, they're very weak. But the third calf is very special. It's shlishi lebeten v'hu mishubach. Bishum shabehema b'katnus eina dayin b'kocha. Right, the cow doesn't have that strength. V'avlad arishon v'asheni enu bari. All this is based on Rashi. Others say, by the way, the word shlish means shlish gidulo. That's 1/3 of its lifespan. So this is the beautiful gift that he sent to Rav Oshia on Purim. V'garba de chamra, an entire barrel full of wine. So Rav Oshia sends back a message to Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, after he receives this beautiful mishloach manos. And it's an amazing message that we have here from Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah about whether you can kill 2 birds. And here we turn to Daf Zayin Amid Beis. Kiyamtu banu Rabbeinu mishloach manos Yisraelu. You have now fulfilled the mitzvah of mishloach manos. Okay, what's the big deal? What's the chiddush here? Now there is a girsa here of umatonos levyonim. Apparently, the Gon, if you take a look at Agos HaGra, he seems to advocate, if I understand it correctly, it's not crystal clear to me, that in favor of this girsa of matonos levyonim. Now, the Ritva actually had that girsa, and he interprets the girsa of matonos levyonim. Because again, we're trying to figure out what was the chiddush that Rav Oshia was mechadesh in his mishloach manos, that Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah had to comment that you fulfilled the mitzvah of mishloach manos. I mean, it seems clear. He sent him a thigh of a calf, and he sent him a barrel of wine. So some say that the chiddush is that you could be yotzei shtei matonos with liquids, not only with solids. But the Ritva says, Shelo haya tshura zu yikara be'einav shel Rav Oshia. That relative to Rav Oshia who sent it, this was not such a special gift. And apparently Rav Oshia was a very wealthy person. Al kein shalch Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah she'ein zu mana reuya li adam asher kemoso. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah was a very wealthy person. El matana mu'etasi kinesina levyon. It's almost as if this is matanos evyon. For an evyon, this would be a great gift, a great boon. But for Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, it's no big deal. I think I made a mistake here. Who is sending to whom? Again, let's emphasize it was Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, the very wealthy fellow, who sent it to Rav Oshia. And Rav Oshia responded in a way of tochacha, sort of. He say, this is like my tanas evyonim. You give me like stuff for the poor. You're a wealthy guy. You should be sending something much more expensive. Your matana muetis is like an esina levyonim. Hadar sholach egla tilsa utlas garbe yai. So now he sends him 3 barrels of wine. Sholach le kiyamtu banu rabbeinu mishloach manos Yisrael. Now, after Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah accepted the tochacha of Rabbi Oshia, he sends him a matana Yosef mechubedes. Egel sholem, not just the yerech, a thigh of an egel, the entire calf, and 3 barrels of wine. In response, Rav Oshia says, now you makayim the mitzvah koroi of Mishloach Manos. In any event, what comes out of this mitzvah is a big chiddush, that when you send Mishloach Manos, it should be yafos lefich vodo. It should somehow reflect your financial status in life, the sender, I mean. And therefore, an Oshir, a wealthy person who sends a cheap gift, and he yotzi bo yedei chovas. Rabba Shadale Lamari Bar Mar Biyad Abaye. He sent Mishloach Manos through a shliach, none other than Abaye. Milah Taska de Kashba, a bag full of dates. Umalei Kasa Kimcha de Avshuna, and a cup full of flour made of toasted wheat. So they toasted the wheat, they ground it into flour, and they put it into a receptacle, which is called an avshuna, kimcha avshuna. Omale Abai says to Rabba, Hashta Omar Mori, when Mori received this gift of Mishloach Manos, here's what his response is going to be. Ichak la malka lehevi, dikula mitzavore lo nochas. Ben Kfar, when a villager becomes king, he doesn't take off his shoulders a basket that he usually carries food in. And the food in the basket is for an animal. But you know what? He got used to living on that standard. Now he's the king of the whole country. He doesn't change his original status. So Rabbah now became the Rosh Hashiva Pumbedisa, and nevertheless, all he's sending as Mishloach Manos is Divrei Machal Pshutim, a couple of dates and some flour. I mean, that's cheapo. Again, the idea of the Ritva that you should send Mishloach Manos L'fi Chodo. Hadar Shadi Le'ihu. Afterwards, Mari Barmar sent to Rabbah again the second time around. Bidei Abaye. No. I'm sorry, not a second time around. I mean a response. In other words, you said me Shalach Manos, and now reciprocally I send you Shalach Manos. So what did Mari send back to Rabbah? You had a shliach there, you might as well send it back. That's how we do it here also. Right? Malo Taska de Zangabila, which is called Zangabil. It's a kind of a spice. A whole sack full of Zangabil. Umela Kasa de Pilpata Aricha. Those long, peppers. Sharp peppers. Abai says to Mori Bar Mar, come on. Hashta Omar Mar, you know what they're going to say about you? My master Rabbah, and he says, I know Shadolei Chulia. I sent him sweet stuff, right? You're sending me back sharp, bitter stuff. I sent you kivsa kasa de kimcha de avchuna, and tomorrow are very sweet. The EU Shadolei Churfa, and he's sending me back something that's charif. It's not an appropriate reciprocal gift here. You have to reciprocate in kind. Omar Abai ki nafki mi beimar. When I left the house of Rabbah on my way to the house of Mori Barmar, Havi Savana, I was full. Ki metamoy someone I finally got there, krivali shitin soy. This is a mind-boggling Gemara. But whenever you see the number 60 or 600, it's always a guzma. It's just it's like an exaggeration. So they brought me 60 bowls. The shitin mine kedera. of 60 different kinds of food. V'achlibu shitin pluge. I ate 60 pieces, one piece from each of the various 60 macholim, ubishula basraisa, and the last of them, which was cooked food, havikarile, was called sli kedar. And sli kedar is something that you cook in a pot, but without any water. It's what's it called in English? Something with an S. I'll remember myself later. And uboy lemechas sa'a abasra. I was so hungry, I wanted to eat the plate itself. Very strange. Let me just see. I think he has a footnote here in the English translation. I'll give it to you in a second. He says, the last dish they gave me was pot roast. 5. Okay, he calls it meat that's roasted in its own liquids. But I think it's something else. It's singed meat or something like that. I forget the word. Anyway, after eating, I wanted to eat the plate. He says it was an abnormal form of eating. So he wants to understand why it's called mechas. Mechas always is when you chew something in an abnormal way. Like, for example, if you take a raw grain, like a kernel of wheat, that's called koses sachita. The Maharsha wants to say that the plate itself was edible. Amar Abaye, Hainu diamri inchi. This is an idiomatic phrase that's popular. Kofin anya v'lo yada. A poor person doesn't know that he's hungry until you feed him, and then he eats a ton. Inami, another popular statement, was Ravcha libesima shchiach. That if you give something sweet as a dessert, even if you're full, there's always room for sweets at the end of the meal. I have a note here. Achsam sofer tomal meises ze bekam tzvis. Ma ba bailashmenu bekol ze. V'inyin ze nira guzma gedola. Sha'ochal abai kol kach harbe. Ma yishmiyonu bekach shatav shel achron utzli kedar. V'im hayadayin ra'ev kol kach sherotza lokus hakara. Madulo ochel yosem mishar tavshilin. He only ate one of each one. Why didn't he eat more? Why do you have to eat the plate? He says the imkar marsha that the plate itself was edible. Why didn't he eat the plate? Therefore, says the Chassam Sofer, this entire mimer is meant to be darshan. Shekasha yotza abai mibeis rabba, hayisavea midivrei Torah. Shechashiv shekvar mile kreisa b'Torah. Umatza kedei midasa. He maxed out in the maximum amount of Torah that he could have learned by Rab. Akshi giel beis Mari bar Mar, pilpulu imo b'shishim mesechtos b'shas. V'lomad sham b'chol mesechta eze davar chadash. V'mesechta achrona shepilpel ba paisa mesechta psachim b'sugis sli kedar. That's how they ate the Korban Pesach. Omar Kacha Baye. I really had a desire to learn the entire Masechta. The Fisha Dinu Shebechol Shana Mishuba Talmud L'Rav. The Yochel Rav Lamdo B'Ezim Masechta Sheyirtza V'L Shloshim Yom Kodem Achad Mishuba Rav L'Talmido L'Lamdo Hilchas Achad L'Fichach Sover Abaye Shemechuyev Mari Bar Mar Lelamdo Es Masechet Psachim. It's 30 days before the Chag. It's already Purim. Mari Lo Ratza Lelamdo. Me'achar the day of Purim is not included in the 30-day period. And Abai says there are two reasons. Shtei sibos lekach sheyasaver kshiyotza mibeis rabba shusavea af shebeemes hayaroyev letorah achas lekotzer hamasig the achas liomek hamusar. Both because of the limitations of the student and also the difficult matter and the subject. Abai bar Ovin, Rab Chanina bar Ovin, Mechalfi Sudasayil Adoyik. Tremendous chiddush. You could be Yotze Mishloch Monos by just swapping monos. Omar Rava, Mechayev Inish Bil Sume Leparaya, Adolo Yoda Ben Oror Homon Lebaruch Mordechai. That's how drunk you have to get. I wouldn't publicize this in Clanton Park. But anyway, so they wanted to establish a chiyuv in the name of Rava that you can't tell the difference between Oror, Haman, and Baruch Mordechai. And there are long discussions here in the notes of the Masifta about this strange kind of barometer to determine whether or not you're drunk or not. Rabba Rab Zera Avdu students Purbadi Adadi Yabasum, they got drunk. Come Rabba V'shachte Rab Zera. If you take this literally, Rabba slaughtered Rab Zera L'mochar Boy Rachme V'achye. And Rabba was able to pray and resuscitate Rabbi Zera back to life. L'shana Hamarlah, the year after, Rabba invites Rabbi Zera again a second time. Nesei Mar V'navet Sudas Purbadi Adadi. Let's have a joint Sudas Purb Hamalei. Lo b'chol shaiter, Reb Zera is not so excited about the proposition. I can't rely on a miracle. If you're going to check me again, I don't know if you'll be able to resuscitate me. Omar Rava Sudas Purim Tachol B'Layla Lo Yotzi Dechovaso. In the yeshivas, they have big sudas at night of Purim with a lot of hoopla and dancing and singing, but that's not the fulfillment of the mitzvah. My taima Yemei Mishta V'Simcha Ksiv, and Yemei refers to the daytime, and the simcha is by day and not by night. The Meiri, by the way, calls the night of Purim the night before Purim. It's not even part of Purim. Rav Ashi Avi Yosef Kamei Memar on Purim. Rav Ashi was in front of Amemar. Noga v'lo osu rabbanon. The day was going away. It was melting away. It was getting late, and the Talmidim did not come into the Beis HaMedrash. Imagine, here's Rav Ashi, a Rosh Hashiva, coming into the Beis HaMedrash on Purim. He's expecting the Talmidim to come to hear the Shir on Purim, and they don't come. Amalei. I'm sorry. Rav Ashi is the Talmud, and Amemar is the Rebbe. So now, Amemar says to Rav Ashi, by time of loss Rabbana, where are the students? I can tell you where the students are. So Rav Ashi says to Amemar, Dilma Tride Besudas Purim, maybe they got caught up in a Sudas Purim. Could that be possible? Amalei, so Amemar says to Rav Ashi, why don't they eat the Sudas Purim at night and come to the Shia in the Beis Medrash by day? Amalei, Rav Ashi says to Amemar, Lo Shmiel Lemar, Hodi Amar Rava, you never heard the statement of Rava, Sudas Purim Shachola B'Layla Lo Yotzi Dechovaso. Amalei, Amemar said to Rav Ashi, Amar Rava Hachi, did Rava actually say such a thing? Amalei in. He actually did say such a thing. In Tonaminei Arbain Zimnin, Amemar learned this halacha over and over again for Rav Ashi 40 times. Until he got to the point in which it was like in his back pocket. And the Mefarshim are wondering, what's so complicated? Do you have to review 40 times that the Sudas Purim has to be eaten by day and not by night? So I have here a note, just 1 second. No, it's not here. So let's just learn the Mishnah and then we'll call it a day. Again, by day and not by night. The Mishnah, until the end of this parak, deals with the laws of Purim and the reading of Megillus Esther. And the Mishnah establishes Ein Ben Yontif L'Shabbos Ela Ochel Nefesh. And at this point, the Mishnah establishes the difference between the laws of Yontif and the laws of Shabbos, and the only difference is Ochel Nefesh. So all the malachas that are not Ochel Nefesh are common to both Yontif and Shabbos. So the Gemara's Medayik Ha Le'inyan Machshiri Ochel Nefesh Zev is Eshavin. By implication, the Mishnah is saying that if you want to sharpen a knife, or you want to take out the ashes from the oven, then Shabbos and Yontif are equal. And just like on Shabbos, you're not allowed to be masaken a machshir, you cannot sharpen a knife. So too on Yontif, you're not allowed to be masaken a machshir, because that's not considered meleches ochel nefesh. It's only a tikkun for meleches ochel, but it's not ochel nefesh per se. And therefore, masnisin the lo Rabbi Yehuda, the Sanya we learned to the Brisa, ein be Yontif Shabbos ela ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshire ochel nefesh. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we expand and widen the scope of the heter ochel nefesh to include even machshire ochel nefesh. Like time in Tanakama, Omar Kroa, who? The pasuk says, Achash yochel ochel nefesh hu levado, and who is a miut, velo machshira, and not the machshirim. And Rabbi Yehuda Omar, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he holds that even machshire ochel nefesh on mutar and yontif. Omar Kra ye'asa lachem. He understands that the word lachem is a ribui, even though who is a miut, but lachem is a ribui. Lachem l'char tzachechem, and that's a ribui for tikkun of machshire ochel nefesh. Ve'idach nami yaksiv lachem. The Tanakama, what's he going to do with the word lachem, which seems to expand the scope of the heter of ochel nefesh with a ribui? Lachem v'lo ovdei kochavim. Interesting. Lachem is not a ribui, the way that Rabbi Yehuda understood it, but rather it's a miut. Lachem means for you, but not for the sake of a guy. Lachem v'lo leklavim, not for your animals. So you're not allowed to cook for your animals on Yom Tov. Ve'idach nami yaksiv hu. Rabbi Yehuda has to deal with the miut of who, and the Gemara answers ksiv hu uksiv lachem. You have to juggle between the miut of who and the ribu of lachem. How do we find a tzad hashava nemak hashava? Kan, the word who is b'machshirin to efshal asosim erev yontiv. He could have sharpened his knife on erev yontiv, and that's prohibited on yontiv. But kan, the word lachem as a ribui, is b'machshirin she efshal asosim erev yontiv. There was no way that he could prepare it on erev yontiv. So let's say imagine a knife that got chipped on Yontif. A knife got chipped on Yontif itself, so he couldn't have prepared it on Erev Yontif. The Mishnah says, Ein bein Shabbos liyom HaKippurim, el shezez dono b'dei odom v'zez dono b'kares. So if you violate Shabbos, you get Misa, and that's a capital punishment, but in the case of Yom HaKippurim, if you desecrate the Yom Kippur, you chayiv kares, which is a punishment that's up in Shamayim, it's bidei Shamayim. So the Gemara's medayik hala idin tashlumin zev zeh shavin. It means that if somebody violated Yom Kippur or Shabbos for that matter, and at the same time he incurred a chiyuv moment like madlus b'disho shel chaver b'Shabbos, then we apply the principle of Nechunya ben Akana that we're about to learn, that chayve krisus is kimle b'derabina. He's potter from tashlumei mom. The Sanya, we learned in the Brisa, Reb Nechunya ben Akana oses Yom Kippur b'Shabbos l'tashlumin. Ma Shabbos mischay b'nafsho. Upot min hatashlumin, af Yom Kippurim, mischay b'nafsho, upot min hatashlumin. So if at the moment that he violates Yom Kippurim, he, let's say, burns down somebody's haystack, then he doesn't have to pay damages for that because he's chayiv kares. Tanan Hasan, we learned in the Mishnah in Masechet Makos, all chayvei kresos, sheloku, nifteru midei krisoson. Once you're chayiv kares and then they give you malchus, you're potter from kares. Once they gave him the malchus, he's like achicha. He's no longer chayiv direi. Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yochanan chaluka well chaver about Hananya ben Gamliel. The other chachamim never accepted this principle. Amar Rava Amri Bei Rav. They said in the base medrash of Rav about Rabbi Yochanan's statement that the Chacham disagreed. Nina, you can prove that from a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Ein ben Yom Kippurim l'Shabbos Elshe," says, "Dona b'dei Oda." It says, "Dona b'dei Kares v'im Isa." If we're going to accept the principle of Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel, namely that once he gets Malchus, he's part from Kares, is Idi b'dei Adam he. Both Shabbos and Yom Kippur are chayev in a bezin shalmata, in a human court. The Shabbos desecrated is chayev misa, and the violation for for Yom Kippur, is malchus. So why does the Mishnah say ein ben? It's not ein ben. So Gemara says, Amar of Nachman, Hamani Rabbi Yitzchak. This Mishnah reflects the Shita of Yitzchak, the Omer Malchus, b'chayvei krisus leka, that you never give Malchus for someone who's chayv krisus, because krisus is a greater, more severe punishment. The Sanya Rabbi Yitzchak Omer chayvei krisus b'chlal hayu. Right? It says in the Pasuk, All asher yasa mikol hatoevos ha'eleh v'nichus ha'nefesh zosos mikerev hamon. V'lo miyotzes karis b'achoso, and then in the next pasuk it says, Ish asher yikach es achoso v'nichrusu. L'aduna v'karis v'lo b'malchus. This is a Gemara Malchus that, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, Yechayev karis but not malchus. So whenever you violate an avera that bears with it a punishment of kares, then he gets kares but not malchus. Our Mishnah, which establishes that if you violate, again, deliberately, v'mezid Yom Kippur Yechayev kares, it holds that you can never be chayev malchus for an avera that generates kares, as reflected by the sheet of Rabbi Yitzchak. However, if theoretically you would be chayev malchus in the case of a chayev kares, then Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel holds, and he might be correct, that he would be potter from kares. Rav Ashi Omar afilu temer rabbanon. Even if you want to say that our Mishnah reflects the Shita Rabbanon, and they hold that you would get malchus for a chiyuv kares, it could still be reconciled with Rabbi Hananya ben Gamliel's opinion that once you get to malchus, you part from kares. It means that when our Mishnah is contrasting Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's ze ikars dono b'dei adam, ze ikars dono b'dei kares. That the ikar punishment, the main punishment for Shabbos is misa b'dei adam. The main punishment for violating Yom Kippur is kares. Now, if the Edom gave him asra for malchus, then according to Reb Chananya, he would be potter from Kores. The Malchus potters him from Kores. And this, my friends, brings us to the Mishnah on the top of Daf Ches Amud Aleph, which we will pick up tomorrow. So I wish you a great day. Thank you so much.